Hello there, dear ones. I'm delighted to see you again. Welcome back to my repository of dreams. How are you all today? I have spent most of the week on a planet called Grecko, where myths and tales are handed down for generations, from mother to daughter, mouth to mouth. Today's poem is told all over Grecko, and has been for hundreds of years. So settle down, relax, put your feet up, and join me to meet the miracle bard. The miracle bard. The boy sat in the courtyard, his tear-stained face forlorn. The sky was lightening. He was doomed to die at dawn. He wished the king had condemned him to the axe or the blade. But far crueler was the decision that the man had made. The boy, though he had done no wrong, would soon be crucified. The thought sent a tremor through him. He no longer had pride. He would have begged on bended knee if he thought it would help. But no one would dare refuse an order from the king himself. He was still cruelly young to die. Jonah was 23. A slave since birth, the king had heard he could play prettily. On the guitar, the harp, the lyre, or anything with strings. His nimble fingers could make the bulky instruments sing. Notes that made the high heavens weep. He'd been content to play obediently for his Lord, hoping that, on some day, through diligence and gentle skill, he'd at last be set free. Although a tyrant owner had slaughtered his family. When Jonah was just 3 years old, he believed that somewhere he'd find or build a new family. That, his choicest prayer, he repeated day after day, until heaven was lit. With the entreaty of the boy who still believed in it. He'd been 9 when the king bought him, and in the early days, the courtiers had been pleased with him when he was brought to play. He was allowed in the harem to play for the ladies, and they had laughed and petted him, their pretty jeweled baby. People said that one day, he'd play at the feet of the king. And although the young man found the idea threatening, he studied hard at his lessons and tried to be happy. Though for the slightest mistake, he was beaten fiercely. He was presented to the king the day he turned 15. By then, he was a handsome lad, tall, sandy-haired, and lean. Allowed to pick the instrument he'd play before his sire. Jonah had not hesitated. He'd picked his gleaming lyre. The king liked the boy and his lyre. He took them both to bed. What Jonah endured that black night should not kindly be said. But it bought Jonah his own room, silk sheets, a purse of gold, and the title of favorite. To see, he'd not be sold. The years went by, and Jonah grew into a handsome man. He learned to flatter, please, and kneel at once upon the king's command. Sometimes, body and soul wept at what was required of him. But still he joyed, and his soul flew when he was asked to sing. The day that Jonah turned 19, the castle shook to hear that the king's favorite concubine was ill. The doctors feared that she might not live out the day. The last time the king's bride lost her life, he'd executed everyone who could not hide. As a slave, Jonah would be among the first on the block. So when, that night, he heard upon his bedroom door a knock, he was sure that his time had come. He was ready for pain. Instead, the soldier said, "You have a task. Come, I will explain." So that was how Jonah was brought to the sweet girl. They said, might soon be gone. She lay in blankets on a feather bed. They wanted him to play his songs, to give the lady peace. And Jonah was glad to help, if it meant her pain would cease. He saw her fever, So he played songs of the mountain pine, of chill earth, buried deep in snow and bitter winds that whine. When she shivered, he changed the song to one of warm spring days, with peaceful unicorns that stopped to crop grass between play. The girl turned over. She sighed and settled deeper to sleep. Jonah thought she was dead, and so, kind soul, began to weep. But when he called the physician, she cried out in delight. The concubine's fever was gone. The girl would be all right. Jonah was glad, till the governors called him to explain. He told them everything he'd done, and then repeated it. The old men muttered, and they scowled, then told Jonah he'd be whipped for overstepping his bounds and acting foolishly. A week later, he was marched to see a girl from a shanty town. She had the pox and would not be much longer in the world. They forced Jonah down to the floor and ordered him to play. He'd spend a week in the stocks if she did pass away. Jonah's heart sank. He must be lost. He'd been lucky before. But what was the chance? One more soul would walk, healed, out the door. If he was clapped in the stocks, a slave with no one to help him, he'd die of thirst within 2 days. They'd just dispose of him. Still, as the child was in pain, all that remained for him was to play long enough to soothe her. He began to sing. Seconds later, the girl sat up and she began to laugh. Jonah froze. Was her mockery to be his epitaph? But then the child, echoing every word, started to sing. By the time the guards returned, she was laughing and playing. From then, although Jonah still wasn't sure that it was real, the governors of the palace decided he could heal. Jonah continued playing, but at night time now and then, he'd hear a knock and be collected by 4 tall masked men, blindfolded and in a carriage, transported through the street to whatever house held the one who'd paid Jonah to meet. His eyes still bound, they'd march him to a private room, and then he'd play them songs upon his lyre till they were healed again. The task left him exhausted, trembling, in need of rest. The other slaves were jealous that young Jonah seemed to test. The written hours of toil, so often without being hurt. Jonah wished he could explain that his role was still the worst. Still, Jonah lived on to be 22 years old, and then he was called to the chambers of his Lord and King again. The king had favored Jonah with gold, jewels, and a soft bed. On other days, he had yelled slurs and struck him hard. Instead, this time, when the king saw Jonah, he dropped down to his knees and begged, "Save my child, and I'll give you what reward you please." Now the princess was the only royal child who still breathed. That was the only reason that Jonah almost believed the wily tyrant of a king might actually give him whatever boon he promised. Still, he had to question him. "You have owned me most of my life, took what you would freely. Why would you give or promise aught, rather than threaten me?" He saw the desperation then, the fear in the king's eyes, and it occurred to Jonah, with a jolt of great surprise, that he was more than a dread lord, to be feared or reviled. Right now, the king was just a father afraid for his child. It occurred to him to refuse, strike at his enemy, who didn't understand why a slave would hate him madly. Then horror flashed in the king's eyes, and Jonah sighed sadly. "I'll try," he said, "but if I save her, you will set me free." The king went pale. Then he went red. "Just what are you asking?" "Freedom," he said. "No chains, no whips, no pain, no forced bedding. I want an outfit, a full purse, a horse, a mare or dray. Then, if I succeed in the task, you let me walk away. You want to leave my employ? Why? I treat you like a prince. I was captured at 9 years. I've not been happy since. Why you? I should kill you myself for your temerity. But, yes, if you save my daughter, then I will set you free. I'll sign a contract. Emily sleeps beyond. Go and play. But if you fail to heal her, I will torture you for days before I hang you on a cross and leave you there to die. Deal, Jonah said, not trembling at the king's baleful eye. What could Jonah do but nod? The servants led him in and showed him to a cushioned seat where he could play and sing. But, left alone, Jonah drifted much closer to the bed. When he set eyes on the lady there, his whole world ended. People say there is no such thing as true love at first sight. They would have changed their minds had they been in the room that night. It wasn't her beauty that struck, though she had amber hair and skin the color of rich cream. No, the woman laid there, had such kindness, such tenderness lit up her dreaming face. Jonah thought the gods had chosen her to prove all their grace. My lady, Jonah whispered, I came to help you. Although, now I see you, I'd give my own life not to see you go. The sigil of death is on your brow. I cannot do you good, though I would give you my last breath, if I possibly could. The lady woke. She smiled. I've lain here, alone many days. It's my pleasure to meet the player that so many praise. I know I'm dying. I'd love to have you spend an hour with me. Of course, if not, I'll have my attendants come set you free. Jonah didn't tell her that when he left her, he would die. He turned a little, dashing a single tear from his eye. He told the lady, speak what you would hear. You may command. For as long as you would have me here, I am your bondsman. My name is Emily, she said, and then she asked of him if he knew the songs her mother had once sung like a hymn. Jonah played them, and Emily smiled, and she clapped her hands. Jonah wished that the power of life and death he could command, because, even as he played, he could see her slip away. I'm sorry that I came too late, Jonah heard himself say. It's okay, Emily told him. I am content to go. I only worry for my father. Poor man loves me so. Would you stay on when I am gone and play your songs for him? I will stay as long as I can, Jonah promised, his hands shaking. And then he played a song to the heavens to trade with him, to take from him his strange power and his voice, leaving him useless to the ones who owned him, but to save Emily. Alas, it seemed that nobody above him heard his plea, for Emily sank down on her bed. She made no outcry, just smiled at him and lay her head down, and graciously died. That was what the king had found when he came barging in. Then Jonah had been beaten. He'd not fought when they dragged him to the courtyard and chained him there. He didn't ask mercy, only sung under his breath, praying for young Emily. That's when a sound came from the palace, a delighted cry. Emily had sat up in her bed. Jonah uttered a sigh. He laid his head against the wall and then gave up his soul. Finally free, he soared to where he would always be whole. Subscribe to become a delicious darling. I don't know how to react to that ending. I'm delighted that the kind princess survived, but I am so sorry for poor Jonah. That said, I believe in souls, so he's probably freer than he could ever have dreamed. Today's word for the comments is dream. Please type it. Then tell me about the craziest dream you have ever had. As always, I would love it if you'd click like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell to become an official delicious darling. I am off for another trip to planet Amora. Who knows? I may be able to bring back some more strange tales for you. Until we meet again, be sure to remember the beauty of music. Always appreciate your freedoms, show kindness, and sleep well. My delicious darlings.